All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mitigating Disasters for Small Businesses. I'm Dr. Portia Jackson with the City of Houston's Office of Business Opportunity, where we are here to be an advocate for our small businesses and make sure that you have the information, the connections, and resources to start, to grow, and to scale your business. And so we are so happy to put on this webinar for you all because September is National Disaster Month. And though that is nothing to celebrate, but it is everything for us to get prepared and make sure that our small businesses have the information to get prepared so that when a disaster does happen, then you are prepared for it and you are not left behind. And what's unique about today's workshop is we're not just talking about natural disasters, but we're talking about disasters of all kinds. There can be different personal disasters like death of a partner, a business partner, or what if your accounts are frozen, cyber attacks. So we're going to cover a lot of things today. So make sure if you take notes with pen and paper, you get your pen and paper. If you take notes with your computer device, get that ready because we have I want to say a star-studded, I can't say cast, but a star-studded panel here to share information. I'm going to read their names real quick and let you know where they're from, and then each of them have some time and they're going to dive right into it. So first you're going to hear from Spurgeon Robinson of Impact Strategic Consulting, and he is my co-host for this webinar. And then you'll hear from Vlad Ibarra. He's from the City of Houston's Emergency Management, Office of Emergency Management. Then you'll hear from Stephanie Wright, Harris County's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And then we'll take a break from the government, and then we'll go into cybersecurity, and you'll hear from Ken Underhill of CyberLife. And then we'll be back with the federal government about disaster resources, and you'll hear from Valerie Marr of the U.S. Small Business Administration District Office, the Houston District Office. And then we're going to put those plans, all that information they told us, we're going to put that into place. So then you'll hear from Arquella Hargrove of Alchemy Consulting Group about the HR piece and how you get those HR plans and together to take care of your employees and make sure that they're notified. And then we're going to end with legal and insurance. And you'll hear from Gregory L. Phillips of Phillips Kaiser PLLC. And then we'll have a panel discussion and we'll take your questions. So again, the chat is available for you. Make sure you are introducing yourselves and letting us know your name, your business, and your contact information, because you never know who wants to reach out to you and do work with you or have some resources for you. And then also utilize that chat. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat. And when we get down to the Q&A, we'll definitely get those questions and get them answered for you. And we want you to just be open and transparent because we want to make sure you have the information. And so as I get ready to bring Spurgeon Robinson up, I just want to point out some things from the assessment that you all took when you registered. When we asked, do you have an employee action plan included in your employee handbook? Only 10% said yes. When we asked, do you have a backup recovery in place? Only 16% said yes. And then when we asked, do you have a written succession plan in place in the unfortunate loss of a key business partner or investor? Only 8% said yes. So that lets us know that this is very much needed, the resources that our panel is going to share with you. So Spurgeon, you're up first.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Portia, for that great introduction and introduction of the team. Excited to have everyone here to talk about what we feel is a very important topic related to small businesses being prepared for disasters, both natural disasters, other types of man-made disasters as well. And you'll hear from a great panel here today. I'm also excited to hear from my colleagues as well. I'm with Impact Strategic Consulting. We're here based in Houston. We're an emergency management disaster recovery firm. And with that, we respond typically to large-scale natural disasters, but also any other sort of natural event that may occur particularly. Our firm has, here based in Houston, been in operation about 16 years. And so we've seen the traumatic impacts of disasters across the country, but even more so locally here in the Houston area as well. So assuming most of us are from Houston, or you may be attending, but at the end of the day, you have a small business, or you may have a business, or you may have even clients that are small businesses. And preparing for disasters is what's really critically important. We give you a scenario, and people don't think about it. You saw the statistics actually that Portia identified, but most people are not preparing for a disaster. We think it won't happen to me. But think about scenarios in the case that, you're in your office and you're hosting a meeting and all your team members are there. And all of a sudden, we're in the lovely city of Houston even today, there's a 60% chance of thunderstorms and showers, right? Those thunderstorms and showers result in the power being lost. All your systems may be down for a while in the building. So it'll pass, right? Then you find out that the parking lot's flooded. Then the streets are flooded as well. Nobody can get home. Those are real significant impacts that we know can happen because we also saw what Harvey did overnight. And so those are things that we have to consider. But what happens when those scenarios happen? You have employees now that may work from home. What happens if there's a fire at their home? What happens to technology and records and all those things in safekeeping? These are things that small businesses, we have to be prepared for and think about because the what if may actually happen. And this is some of the things that we want to make sure that we focus on, discuss is really getting you prepared to address the what if that may happen, because these are real realities, particularly, I used the example of the city of Houston, where a 60% chance of a thunderstorm turns into a real event, power loss. How do you do evacuation planning, or your system's backed up? What if it's payroll time and it's due at a certain time to the bank? As we know, as small businesses, if it's not there, everyone's payroll's late. That's an internal problem that it creates and dominoes and effects. So those are kind of things that we want to prepare ourselves to be able to talk about and address. And don't think that's extreme, because these events are occurring more frequently, as we know in the news and we see in our daily cycle. But another important question I want everyone to think about as we go through this webinar, and we'll have time to talk about in Q&A, is have you really addressed how long can your business be down before you're no longer in business? Critical part to this is just how long could you survive if your business is no longer operational because of a flood event, or because of a natural disaster, a tornadic event, because of a fire, or any other event that may happen. So those are the kind of things you should be considering and how you prepare for those. And it's important to get a plan around how you're going to communicate to your employees, most importantly, your customers, and your vendors. If something happens, short-term or long-term, communication plans are going to be key. And that will be some of the things that we'll touch on in our college, to touch on to some of the discussions as well. And will you lose any customers through those impacts? If you're down, how long will it take for another customer switches to another competitor? Do you lose employees? What's the financial impact? So those are kind of things that as a small business owner, we still need to think about, even if we're not thinking that it will happen to us, because it may. But having a plan is essential. We're going to talk about that. There are different types of plans, and everybody says, oh, you build a plan, you go to FEMA.gov, or you go to Small Business Association, they have plans there as well. It's important to remember as a small business, and we teach that we should always have, you can have a comprehensive plan, 125 page, 35, 300 page document that nobody's going to read. It's more important, I recommend to our small business, to have a more focused and tailored plan. So having a plan that deals with just fire and evacuation, having a plan that deals with just your cybersecurity break, having a plan that deals with incidents where your technology down, or your remote employees can't dial back in or reach the servers on site. So having smaller tailored plans, or something for unique scenarios, are sometimes more effective than have this one size fits all kind of comprehensive plan. That's really not effective anymore. And last but not least, I turn it over to my colleagues. Practice your plan. At some point in time, run a scenario, in a small scenario. Practice your plan, practice evaluation procedures, practice at some point where if there was a fire incident, how will you recover? Practice if your technology went down for an extended period of time. What would be the pathway for you to communicate back to your employees, your customers, and your vendors, and how fast could you get back operational so that you can be a successful small business? All right. So with that, I am going to pass it over to our moderator so she can tell me who's next.
Yes, definitely. And those are some great points that you mentioned for our business owners to really think about. So now let's go and move to the city of Houston with Vlad Ibarra, and he's going to talk about emergency management and give advice at where the perspective of where the city comes in during emergencies. Vlad?
Portia, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and being part of this process. So my name is Vlad Ibarra. I'm the Deputy Emergency Management Coordinator for the City of Houston. I've been with the city for about 3 years. Basically, the Office of Emergency Management, what we do is we coordinate a lot of the efforts and basically uh, sort of undergoings specifically to disaster. So if there's any disaster for the city, what we do is we coordinate with the different first responders or the different partners that we have. I know we have in this workshop, you're going to hear about the county and again, the SBA, FEMA, again, a lot of resources. But overall, again, we just provide support and basically help you get through the event. The Office of Emergency Management, one of the key tags that we also do is we go to the community. So again, we do a lot of community outreach. So one of the pieces that we're trying to do and we're trying to enhance going forward is being able to provide resources for you. And as Spurgeon mentioned, there is a lot of what if incidents that we'll need to take into account. And so overall, the big emphasis that I'll be going through as part of the presentation is basically developing an emergency plan. I know Spurgeon talked about a lot of the different items. I would say some of the things that are really easy for a small business to do is specifically how are you going to touch base with some of the vendors. So again, if you have these essential services that come to your office, and again, because of any given incident, you're not able to touch base with them. Do you have a list of vendors that you can reach out to? And I think that a lot of us sort of experienced this during COVID, so we were able to use a lot of those outside of the box. And I would say definitely go back to those again vendors or sort of specific items that you did specifically to sort of build in redundancy so that you can build a plan. As Spurgeon mentioned, building a plan doesn't have to be very intricate, doesn't have to be very sophisticated, but you do want to have certain specific sort of items that help. So again, communications becomes really key. Make sure that you have some sort of phone tree for your employees, specifically just in terms of my background. So before coming to the city of Houston, I used to be an emergency manager in California. And so we were dealing with a lot of the wildfires, specifically to small business owners. I know that for a lot of them, they were not expecting wildfires to come to their district. In fact, for me, in Santa Clara County, our threat for a fire was really low, but we ended up having one. And so a lot of those business owners, the one that had put in preparedness plans, really fared off so much better. One of the ways that they were able to do that is they had records of a lot of their different plans. They had documentation that, again, was relevant to their systems. So and now some prevention will definitely help you just be leaps and bounds ahead of, again, any sort of disaster. One of the things that we as a city will do if there is a disaster is we will set up what's called a multi-agency assistance center, and there's different names. So basically, it will be a center in which you have individuals from the Small Business Administration. I know we have someone that's going to give a lot of information specifically to that. We'll have individuals from the county. We'll have, again, state and local, again, representatives there to provide resources and to help you. So perfect example, again, going back to California with the wildfires, if individuals lost documentation specifically to the DMV, then we had those reps there. If you needed to, again, apply for small business loans, then you had individuals from the SBA. If you needed, again, FEMA assistance, we had those there as well. So again, there's multi-agency coordination that basically, again, will help you as a small business owner. But again, I think it's incumbent upon you to sort of, again, create that communication, create those redundancies so that you're able to take care of those essential items. And the last piece is the continuity. So again, ensuring that you actually have a plan to be able to continue essential services. And what does that look like for you? And then again, it doesn't have to be very intricate. There is a lot of information and resources specifically on the FEMA website, and we as a city are actually trying to create the same thing. So I would, again, we're working on it, but definitely our department is going to be a resource that you can go into the Office of Emergency Management website, and you'll be able to get templates and get, again, specific information to help you with your, again, small business needs. The last thing I'll say is, and this is a big plug for Portia, specifically to the Office of Business Opportunity, there's a lot of resources that they have available. There's procurement opportunities. So again, make sure you engage with the city, because there's definitely a lot of different items that you'll need to take account of. The other piece too is specific to your preparedness is sort of insurance. Do you have flood insurance? And again, that is one of the big sort of threats that we have as a city. So do you know where to go for that information? Another piece that I'll say specific to a flood risk is the county, and I know Stephanie's coming in after me. The county has actually a website in which you can actually just put your zip code and then figure out if you have specific risks for your area, and then again, but it'll help you specifically to sort of get in that flood insurance. The last thing I'll say specifically to the city, and again, the way that we're trying to help you as a small business owner is we are working on it's called a resilient hub. But basically, resilient hubs are places in which they're community trusted places that we already have. We're going to be having 5 throughout the city. But what they do is pre-event. We're going to have preparedness information. So again, if you need information for your business, you can get the information there. And then afterwards, when we do have a disaster, then they'll be helping us with those multi-agency resource centers and providing information specifically to sort of, again, small loans or again, information specifically if you needed to get a generator, then how do you go about finding that funding and that sort of stuff. But again, the resilient hubs are sort of leveraging the ongoing sort of community networks that we have. They're actually within the 10 complete communities that we have throughout the city, and again, they're just a resource for you to tap into. The last thing I'll say is that we as a city also have just an alert system, and so we have Alert Houston. So I would urge you to apply, so basically sign up for Alert Houston. And so what you'll do is you'll actually receive information specific to any sort of disaster that's taken place. Again, we'll provide information, and in our website, we're going to be providing resources for you as a small business owner to again be better prepared. I think that's it, Portia, for me. Let's go to the next person.
Thank you, Vlad. And make sure you all sign up for Alert Houston. He hit on some very great points and making sure and letting you know that we are all connected to make sure that we are getting you all the information, and you need to be connected as well so that you can pass that information on to your constituents and to your vendors as well as your employees. And so now we have Stephanie Wright with Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Stephanie?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Portia. I'm Stephanie Wright. I'm the recovery specialist for Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Our name is a mouthful, so feel free to just shorten it to OEM. That's our, a quick abbreviation for us. But what our office does is we help prepare, safeguard, and protect the residents and property of Harris County from the effects of disasters through effective planning, preparation, response, and recovery activities. And unfortunately, here in Harris County, we need to do a lot of that very frequently because we've averaged since 1979 over 46 federally declared disasters, 23 of those being major disasters, and we're averaging pretty much one every 9 months. So if you remember back to Winter Storm Uri, that was our last presidentially declared declaration. So that was a couple years ago now. So we're due. I'm going to focus my presentation on what we do after an incident. So we do have some preparedness programs that we can help with educating your employees and your staff on how to be prepared. Also some small business resources we can provide. But I'm really going to focus mainly on how our organization can help you after the disaster happens. So as you know, we face many hazards in our community, from hurricanes to flash floods, tornadoes, winter storms, currently a drought, and wildfire risks. But we also have other things like building collapse and hazmat incidents that we may need to prepare for. So for your small business, a disaster can result in a loss of a physical structure or inventory, disruption of your supply chain, loss of employees, loss of revenue. And for those types of incidents where there's a large-scale disaster, we need to capture all of your damage information. So in the short-term recovery phase, we're talking the days after a disaster, we're going to be asking the community, residents and small businesses to provide us with their loss information. And that really helps us tell the story to our state and federal partners that we need to, additional resources to help our community recover. It also helps inform our philanthropic partners who may raise money after a disaster to help activate resources to the community in need. One of the things that we focus on as an organization is really helping coordinate the restoration of our public infrastructure. Obviously, we need our roads to be open in our community, to be able to move throughout the county, to be able to restore our business and our economic capacities. So we'll make that a priority. You can feel free to check in with our website, readyharris.org. We'll be posting all of that information about which areas are open, how the traffic flows through our partners at TxDOT and Metro. We also want to let you know when it's safe to return home. If you're a community member that was asked to evacuate and you've moved to Austin or San Antonio or Dallas for the time being while the storm passes, we want to let you know when it's safe to come home and restore businesses, operations here in the community. So we'll let you know through our alert system as well. We also have Harris County Alerts program. I'll put that in the chat in a minute. We also want to make sure that we're helping our community infrastructure resume. So our community infrastructure, those are things like your daycares, your school districts, your grocery stores, all of that infrastructure that you really need to support the local economy and bring residents back to the area. So we're making sure that those things are being restored. We're working with our public health partners to make sure that drinking water is safe and that our restaurants and retail food establishments can reopen safely. And we're also working with our Department of Economic Equity and Opportunity to make sure that our small business community is receiving information from them as well. A couple of things that we have learned over the last couple of years in working with economic recovery is that our local government may need to help support local businesses. After Winter Storm Uri, we needed to investigate some small property owners, were not able to provide repairs to their renters, and this was just because they didn't qualify for any of the assistance that was available. So we partnered with philanthropic partners who don't normally fund small businesses after a disaster, but they actually were able to fund the small property owners to make repairs to those homes, so those renters could continue to live in that area. That was a new thing for our philanthropic partners, but it was a necessary recovery activity for that incident. We also activated a small business relief fund during COVID-19. That was another first for us. We had never done a relief fund before for our small business community. I think that was pretty successful. We understand also that it's going to take time for you to identify all the losses that you've experienced. So we talked about knowing your physical damages and reporting that in the short term, but we may come back to you and ask you about your revenue losses in the longer term, so more like 6 months out. So that way we can tell a complete story and get more of that federal and philanthropic funding into our region if it becomes available. We also really want to build partnerships before disasters. So as you're thinking about, what you can do before a disaster to be prepared, engaging with your local government can really help, speed things along in the recovery process. So one of the ways we are doing that is the City of Houston and Harris County both are on a supply chain call where we lead our supply chain partners to make sure that we're getting key inventories into our community. We're also working on an industry call where we're building our relationships with our industry partners through our industrial liaisons here at our office. We're also trying to hear from you as small businesses on how the government can help you in economic recovery. I'm going to share a QR code. It's a brief survey that just asks you about your experiences with recovery and recovering from previous disasters and how local government can help support you in the future. And one of the ways that we've heard from some of our partners that could look like is actually supporting a business recovery center in the short-term recovery. So if we were without power for a long period of time, how could we leverage our public and private partnerships to be able to provide a location and Wi-Fi and electricity to our small businesses so they can access that vital resource to keep their business alive? I'm happy to take questions. I'll provide my information in the chat, and thank you so much for letting me speak today.
Thank you, Stephanie. You gave a lot of information, and so folks, you have the information as far as what to do after disaster, and make sure you go to readyharris.org. And again, we'll be sharing all those different links in the chat. And so now we're going to move to something that I always joke and say it could be kind of scary, but he's not going to scare you. What about cyber attacks? And what if your accounts are frozen? So I'm going to bring up Ken Underhill from CyberLife, and he's going to talk about the cybersecurity portion of how do you get prepared if you have cyber attacks. Ken?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Portia, and thanks everyone for attending. Ken with CyberLife, we're a cybersecurity media and education company, so we help businesses reduce the material cyber risk. So lots of cyber attacks in the news. Many of you, if you follow the news, you would have seen the MGM Resorts got hit recently, a couple days ago. They're still dealing with that. I know some people on their cyber team, so I know things I can't share. Just keep in mind that it can happen to anyone. In fact, small businesses are usually targeted a lot more than the big companies. It's easier if I hit a small business, a small mom and pop restaurant and I hit them for 10 grand or so. It's much easier to collect than it is a big company that's going to usually involve the FBI. So what is ransomware? And I'll touch on the frozen accounts real quick before we dive into ransomware. So frozen accounts, it's usually around fraud. And in that case, just reach out to your financial institution. You can usually clear up the matter. You see frozen accounts a lot more overseas, where any type of fraudulent activity freezes the entire bank account versus just you being able to call in. Like in India, for example, they usually have to actually go in person to the financial institution to resolve whatever the issue is. So not so much here in the US, but it can happen. And if that's the case, just number one, contact your financial institution. Number two, contact law enforcement if your attorneys feel it's a viable thing for you to do. Usually don't have to do that, but sometimes you will. So let's dive into ransomware a little bit. What is ransomware? Easiest way to think of that is pretend we're all back in like junior high and you like somebody in the classroom and you want to pass a note to them, a little love note, and you hand it to me and you say, hey, Ken, can you pass this to Sally or whatever? And instead of passing it to them, I'm a bad guy. And so I take a secret code I've created and I jumble up all the letters and numbers and all that stuff. And I make it where you can't actually read it. And I say, look, Portia, pay me $5 and I'll go ahead and I'll decrypt it and I'll hand it to the person that you wanted me to hand it to. So that's the easiest way to think of ransomware. And what they're doing is they're just doing the same thing with your files, your data, but they're doing that at a scale. And unfortunately, it's not $5 that you have to pay. It's usually on average, depending on the source you look at, anywhere from like $20,000 up to a couple $100,000 for most small businesses. Once you hit the bigger companies like MGM, for example, or Caesars, that's where you get into the multi-million-dollar stuff. Usually a small business, depending on your revenue, they're not going to hit you for millions of dollars because most of us can't pay that as small business owners. So kind of a number to keep in mind for most ransomware, it's around 2% of your annual net revenue if they've done the homework on your company. Most of them don't. It's just the ransomware gangs do kind of like a Netflix approach where they rent out the ransomware that they develop to all these other people around the world that then attack you as a small business owner. Ransomware payments themselves aren't the huge chunk of what the loss is. So that's only about 15% or so of the total cost. It's things like lost revenue, reputation damage, the loss of trust, loss of investment, because if you're trying to go for funding, if you've got a ransomware attack or some other type of cyber attack, you may not get the funding that you're looking for. Things like litigation, fines, depending on what industry you're in, things like that. So there's a lot of cost involved with these different types of cyber attacks and not just ransomware attacks. You might be asking, well, how do they actually get in? Like what, do they show up at the office and get in that way? Sometimes, but not usually. Usually it's what we call social engineering. And all that is at a high level is just getting someone to do an action that they normally wouldn't do, or if they knew what was going to happen. So for example, if I'm driving in Houston and I stop at the side of the road and you come up to me and you say, can I get $1? Can you help me out? I'm not usually thinking that you're going to rob me, right? I think you're just asking me for $1. But if I know in advance that you're going to rob me, if I roll down my window, I'm not going to roll down my window, or at least I shouldn't. And that's the same way with social engineering on your company, is if people know what might happen, they probably wouldn't give you the access to do these things. And it happens to the best of us. I mean, even security people, cybersecurity experts, or quote unquote experts, fall victim to these attacks, as you see probably with the MGM Grand once that investigation completes. So social engineering is just getting someone to do something else, something that they would normally do. It happens via email. I think many of you probably have gotten random text messages in the middle of the night talking about your PayPal account, your bank account's locked out, or a credit card that you don't even have is locked out. And hey, just click the link. I've gotten some from Oprah. I was so excited, but I realized, no, it's not really Oprah sending me a text, unfortunately. The other main area of cyber attacks is unpatched software. All it means is that software that's out of date. For those of you on a call that might be using Microsoft Windows and you keep not rebooting your laptop because you don't want to do the updates, please do the updates, because that's going to help protect you against a lot of different cyber attacks that are out there for the most part. And so how can you know you're affected with ransomware? Biggest thing is you're going to get a pop-up on your screen usually that's going to say, hey, you're infected. Pay me in Bitcoin, X amount of dollars in Bitcoin. Another thing might just be files. You can't open them anymore. They got a weird extension, or you open them and the data's corrupted on them. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a big pop-up on your screen telling you that you're infected. So what can you do in the case of a ransomware attack or any other cyber attack? The biggest thing is preparing in advance, and many people have already talked about preparation. Having a business continuity plan, all that is, hey, if something happens in my business, an incident happens, whether that's a cyber attack or not, what do we do to continue business operations? How do we keep making money? How do we keep serving our clients? What do we do? Another thing you want to have is a disaster recovery plan. So if something like a Hurricane Harvey happens again, a flooding happens, a fire happens, anything like that, that's on the more IT side of things, what do you do? Can your employees work remote? Are they remote right now? What happens if the power grid fails in Texas? Do you have employees across the country that they can pitch on the work and keep the business going while your employees in Texas are down and offline? And then also an incident response plan. So what happens in a cyber attack? What do you do? Who do you call? Who's involved in that? Do you involve legal? Do you involve other departments? Do you have an IT team? Do you have a third party that you contract out for the IT and the cybersecurity services? So all these things you want to think about in advance. I know Portia mentioned the survey looked like a lot of people didn't have a business continuity plan in place. They didn't have a plan for recovery in place. And even if you're a single person LLC or quote unquote solopreneur that's offering services to other organizations, you still may be a target because you're part of the supply chain of those other companies. So it's much easier for me to hack you than it is for me to go after like a Boeing, for example. So things you need to keep in mind around the planning in advance. And then of course, as far as like actual incidents, the biggest thing is detecting it. And so oftentimes you can just automate that with different tools, different security tools, detecting it and then isolating the infection. So just like if we have like COVID is a good example. If we have a massive infection going on of people, we want to isolate people. So with COVID, we all had to stay indoors and isolate ourselves. Same way here. We want to isolate whatever computers are infected so that way it doesn't spread across our entire organization, because then it becomes very bad in the case of like MGM or these other large companies. It becomes very bad because then it might affect things, might take down our business. Some businesses, there was I forget the name, there was a cloud provider recently that got hit with ransomware. And essentially they just told all their clients, sorry, we can't do anything about that. So I don't want to scare you all to death, but understand that planning in advance and doing things like best practices based on your industry, those go a long ways against preventing these types of things. So the last thing I'll leave you with is some basic information. Have a backup, even if you're a small business, a single LLC service provider, like a credit consultant or something. What kind of files and data are you working with? And instead of just having that in Google Drive, maybe get an external storage at Best Buy or something and put them on there as well every so often. Maybe once a week, just say, I'm going to back up my files that I need to run my business. And same thing with anything you store up in the cloud, do it in different places. So if you use Dropbox, also use like Google Drive. Like just have a backup plan for anything around the cyber attacks. So I'm going to stop there because I know we're limited on time, but really the biggest thing is planning and taking those actions in advance. And if you need help, I'm going to throw my info in the chat. Feel free to reach out and I'll point you in the right direction based on your industry.
Thank you, Ken. He shared a lot of great practical tips that you can do to prepare and how to bounce back if you have cyber attacks. And folks, please remember to use the chat if you have any questions, because we will have time for Q&A at the end. So as the presenters are speaking and sharing information, if you have a question, put it in the chat. We'll definitely get it answered. And so now we're going to move to the federal government and find out about the different disaster resources that are available to you as a small business. So we have Valerie Meyer with the US SBA, which is the Small Business Administration from the Houston District Office. Valerie?
Thank you very much, Portia, and the City of Houston for hosting a webinar on this important topic. I'll start by a phrase that we've all heard. It's not a matter of if, but when the next disaster is going to strike. A pretty staggering statistic in the world of small business is that 40% of businesses won't reopen immediately after a disaster. So if you look at statistics, I mean, they're pretty staggering, and it all really relates back to what everyone's talked about here this morning is being prepared. SBA's role in disaster is really threefold. The first being disaster preparedness. So what we do at our SBA Houston District Office is work to educate small business owners about being prepared. You've heard it several times today. As a small business owner, you need to be constantly assessing your risk. You need to create that plan, that continuity of operations plan, and you need to execute that plan with your staff. Practice with your staff for when these incidents occur that you are ready. The SBA website, and I'll drop it in the chat box here in just a minute. The SBA website has a lot of toolkits, templates, checklists for you to be able to review to help you make sure that your business is ready for when that disaster does occur. Again, not a matter of if, but when. So we want you all to be prepared. But how I think the SBA differs from a lot of organizations you've heard from today is that SBA offers financial assistance after a declared disaster. These are loans, but when it comes to disaster assistance, SBA disaster loans are not just for small businesses. They are available for eligible businesses of all sizes, nonprofits, homeowners, and renters. Again, these are loans. These are not grants, but they are low interest. We realize that this is a trying time for small businesses, and so these are fixed rate, low interest loans. They have a 1-year deferral period, so you're not going to be required to make a payment on that loan for 1 year because we want you to have time to get back on your feet. No interest is accruing during that year. And these are some recent changes that have been made to the disaster loan program to make it easier for businesses to recover and be able to repay this loan back. Again, like I mentioned, small businesses, businesses of all sizes, actually, private nonprofits, homeowners, and renters can apply for an SBA disaster loan. SBA works hand in hand with FEMA and with the Office of Emergency Management to set up actual business recovery centers in the areas that have been hit, say, by a flood or a tornado, so that the local community actually has resources to be able to walk in and sit down and get one-on-one assistance. Otherwise, it is an online process as well, so people can visit the disaster website and apply online as well, or again, walk into those recovery centers that are going to be set up in your community. Another thing that I think is important to mention is mitigation. So if you do receive an SBA disaster loan, you have the opportunity to increase that loan up to 20% to help you mitigate for future disasters. For example, obviously flooding is an issue here in certain situations. So you could use mitigation funds to elevate your structure, to add a sump pump, to seal a roof deck. So we're trying to make it with a disaster loan program to not only help you with the current disaster situation, but to improve your chances of not having to deal with that same issue in the future. So I think mitigation is another aspect that SBA can help businesses in as well. The third thing that we do here at the SBA focuses on resiliency. So we have our SBA Resource Partner Network. These are business advisors and mentors that are here to help small businesses make sure they're prepared for that next disaster, help them get their financials in order. Should you need a loan, they can make sure that you're loan ready. Put this information in the chat box, but these organizations are SCORE, the Small Business Development Center, and 2 women's business centers. So these mentors and advisors are well connected to the Houston ecosystem. They've all been through disasters here in Houston, and so they know what small businesses are going to face, and they can make sure that you as a business owner are prepared, and then after the disaster to help you become resilient, to help your business flourish and your business to grow. And so again, I think our role is 3-part. 1, helping with that disaster preparedness. 2, helping businesses recover with that loan program. And 3rd, helping businesses to become resilient with our mentors and advisors that are able to assist business owners, before the disaster, through the disaster, and after the disaster. So again, I'm going to drop all that information in the chat box and happy to answer additional questions as well.
Thank you, Valerie. She shared a lot of information and how you can get and obtain resources for your business and different partners that are associated with the government that can help you to get those resources and utilize those. So now we're going to move into HR. So we talked about, you heard about having a plan in place and being communicative with your employees and your vendors. So we're going to bring up Aquella Hargrove of Alchemy Consulting Group, and she's going to talk about what it is to have an operations plan and what do you do if you can't make payroll, and how do you effectively communicate that information to those various different folks that are involved with your business. Aquella?
Hello, thank you, Portia. Thank you. It's been great to be here with you all and great hearing all of the different advice for sure. Again, Aquella Hargrove with Alchemy Consulting Group. We're based here in Houston, and we partner with organizations in different industries across the country as it relates to helping to transform their workplace cultures. And we do that through human resources consulting. We do it through coaching, learning and development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I wanted just to share, when you think about, again, a disaster, and unfortunately we've experienced those as a recent, the pandemic, and of course before that, Hurricane Harvey. And so I always like to recommend is to have that HR disaster plan, which is that structured strategy or set of procedures that you prepare that's going to help you to anticipate, respond to, and recover from those unforeseen events that could harm your employees or disrupt your operations or impact the business continuity. And so when we have that plan, it's going to help us again to better communicate to our employees and be able to have those things in place that are needed. And so when we think about having the plan, 1, it's going to help you to make sure you do have an emergency fund that's going to cover those salaries for a particular period of time, as well as consider having that business interruption insurance for any of those extreme scenarios or disasters. So when I'm wearing my HR hat or when I'm working with clients, making sure, again, how long can you fund for payroll for your employees? So that's going to be key, and communicating along the way to your employees, hey, here's our status, here's what we can do, here's what we will do as it relates to payroll and that employee status, so they know how to prepare for themselves. We saw a lot happening during the pandemic where companies had to furlough employees, had to lay off for a certain period of time, and that might be part of the plan as well, and being able to communicate that. Another thing to consider in the plan is to being able to, how will you communicate during inclement weather? And so when I'm working with clients or when I have my HR hat on, we made sure we had everyone's phone numbers. That way we sent out a mass text message to check in with people, have them check in with us. That was our source of communication. Or, if we were able to do emails, or during the pandemic, we set up where we had these weekly or daily touch points via Teams or Zoom to check in and communicate status and communicate what was going to happen as it relates to workloads and workflow. So making sure to have that as part of your HR disaster plan, and also being able to communicate decisions as it relates to work delays or closures as well. Another thing to think about that's part of that plan is when a disaster hits, it's impacting your employees mentally and their physical well-being. And so you want to make sure that you are checking in and offering any support that you can as it relates to your employees' well-being. When I forget what hurricane it was, but we actually sent out care packages to employees for one of my client groups, sent out care packages to their employees with food and different things because those employees, again, couldn't get out or whatever was happening. And so those are things that you can help and that can be part of your plan as well. And then also thinking about opportunities for flexibility and work arrangements. And so when a disaster hits, and I'll just go back to the pandemic where everyone was home. And so, but again, working through flexibility and people had different situations going on. And so being able to offer alternative hours to work, as well as, again, people were in different areas and parts of the country. And so working and being flexible based on family responsibilities, all of that, again, should be a part of that plan. Again, just thinking about every and all thing that can happen. Then something else to consider that's part of that HR disaster plan is just making sure that you are incorporating drills. How many of us remember, and if you're in any office building, there's the fire drills that's happening. And so it was great to see client groups who had already had their safety plans in place. They were already doing fire drills and different other drills. And so they were prepared. And so that too should be a part of your HR disaster plan, as well as backup of your documents and data. So working with an IT company, and thank you, Ken was sharing, but working with an IT company to make sure your information is backed up and you have access to servers, external servers. I had a client that here in Houston, but they had their external servers were in a whole different state. And so they were able, again, to access the data even though they weren't in the offices. So making sure you have a digital backup of all of your essential HR documents, employee data, especially, again, if you're continuing to run payroll, making sure you're working with a payroll provider, again, that you can access that data. So that's very key. And then using cloud storage solutions. So I know a lot of us probably are using that, but just being mindful of that. So I want to wrap up and just to kind of high level give some additional tips based on timing here for you all to consider. One is to start now. Don't wait for a disaster to strike. Have your plan ready. We already heard it's not if, it's when. And so being able to have it in place. Leverage the collective wisdom of your team to develop a comprehensive plan. Delegate that out. If you have an operations person or admin, help bring them in to help you plan that, as well as seek out external experts or the agencies that specialize in disaster recovery to help you with the plan. Invest in technology so you can have that backup, your data backed up, and you're able to communicate efficiently. You're able to manage any remote work that's happening, and keep your employees informed. You stay informed. I've had clients, they have news on 24/7 because, again, they want to make sure that they're monitoring and making sure that they're being able to pivot at any time. Educate and train your employees so they understand their role during a disaster and how to respond in an emergency. And then finally, again, just work the plan and make sure you have that in place because, again, we want to make sure that we're prepared at all time. Thank you. I'll drop my information into the chat if anyone has any questions, if I can be a resource for you. And looking forward to the next part of the conversation. Thank you again, Dr. Portia.
Thank you, Aquella, for sharing that information and giving tips and the different things we need to have in that HR disaster operation plan. And so now we're going to move to our last, but definitely not least, our panelist is Gregory Phillips, and he's going to talk about the legal concerns that could arise before, after, and actually during disaster, and what happens, what do you need to have in place in regards to being, with your policies and your legal assistance, if that business or that disaster happens, but also what if your partner or a key business investor is no longer here with us, right? What things need to be in place for that? So Gregory?
Thank you, Portia, and it's thanks for allowing me to participate today. As Portia mentioned, I'm with Phillips Kaiser. We're actually a corporate boutique law firm. We provide corporate transactional services for small and mid-sized businesses, and we also provide what's called outsourced general counsel services for businesses that are looking at maybe bringing on a full-time in-house lawyer. We actually do that on a part-time basis. And I'm going to talk about three categories today dealing with disasters. You've heard many of the other speakers talk about plans, having a plan in place. Two of the categories I'm going to talk about from a legal standpoint are intuitive. I'm going to talk about insurance issues. The other is contract issues. The third, as you heard Portia mentioned, is not as intuitive. A disaster can actually be the split of owners of a business and what I call the 3Ds, the death, disability, and divorce issues that arise with owners in a business. So we'll talk about those three categories. And I'll actually talk about, if you have a plan, what is a process dealing with some of these three categories. The first,
I got it right here. All good.
the first is insurance.
Hold on.
If there's a disaster, most businesses are going to point to their insurance coverage to get for some type of recovery. If they've had a loss of equipment or a loss of assets during some type of a disaster. But most business owners are actually asked, do you really understand what insurance policies you have in place? And have you actually reviewed, and do you have a process to periodically, whether it's annually upon renewable, have you actually gone through and do you understand your policies? Do you understand what can be claimed and what is the process for you to make a claim? Have you looked at your policies and actually looked at in your policy statements and determined the type of coverage you have, what exclusions in those policies are included, as well as the policy limits? Are you insured for the replacement value of equipment? And what does it mean by replacement value? Whatever on the books you cover as the value of the equipment you have or the assets you have, does your insurance policy actually give you that value back in the event of a loss? Or are you limited to some type of market value, which means there may be a gap? Maybe you actually don't get the replacement value. You'll get a dollar amount, but you may have a gap in what you really need to do to get your equipment back. And so as far as the restrictions in your policies and the limits, have you sat down and really gone through to understand what those are? Do you know when and how to file a claim? Do you have the proper numbers to call, or do you have to do it online? What is the process if you have to make a claim after a disaster with your insurance company? Do you actually know what that process is? The bottom line is I tell clients, sit down at some point in time, periodically, or even maybe more additional times than that, sit down with your insurance agents and work through these questions so that you have a full understanding that if a disaster hits, you know exactly what's going on with your policies and you know exactly how to make a claim. Maybe you don't have an agent. Now most people can go online and get their policies themselves. Sometimes insurance language can be very complex. Sit down with your counsel, sit down with your lawyer, and have them help you walk through your insurance policies. We actually do a periodic review with some of our clients with their insurance coverages so that they have an understanding of what they have. Ken was on, there's actually the type of policies you can get, cybersecurity. And sometimes if you're dealing with municipalities, they require you to have cybersecurity insurance. So understand your insurance coverage. We'll move to the next category, contracts. Again, it's intuitive. Most people say, yeah, I have contracts with my suppliers, I have contracts with my customers. But have you really studied and understand what terms apply in the event of a disaster? And I'll walk through a few of those terms. Supply chain issues and deliverables. If there's a disaster, many times your key suppliers supplying key parts, key goods, or key services for you, they may be shut down. As a result, what effect is that going to have on your business? Do you have a plan if those key suppliers are shut down? Do you have alternative supply? And then also, what obligations do your suppliers have to you in the event of a disaster? Do you understand those terms? Also on the customer side, you may have customers who may be unwilling or unable to accept product from you. And in that instance, what rights do you have under the contract? and what rights do the customers have? What are the cancellation and delay terms in the contract? Do you understand exactly how those work and how they are implemented in the event of a disaster? The other contract term that you should understand in your contracts with customers or suppliers or service providers is what's called a force majeure term. In the event of what's considered an act of God, a natural disaster, a hurricane, or if there's a fire. And then I tell clients now, after the COVID pandemic, you need to make sure that pandemics are included in your force majeure terms. Even cybersecurity events can be considered force majeure terms. So understand the force majeure terms in your key contracts. I tell customers, my clients, look at both your top 20 contracts with suppliers or your top 20 contracts with customers, and understand those terms and study those. But with force majeure terms, you need to understand, can a customer cancel the agreement if you're down for some reason because of a natural disaster for 60 days or 90 days, and understand exactly what those force majeure terms are. Another key term in your contracts is the indemnity provisions. If you have a customer that for some reason they can't perform because of you, because you're down because of a hurricane or a fire, a natural disaster, and for some reason they get sued by a third party, your indemnity obligations may require that you cover that customer in that suit. So make sure you understand your indemnity obligations with your customers. Understand, are there limits, right, on what you can claim against a supplier in your agreements? In other words, is there a maximum on the amount your suppliers may owe you in the event that they can't perform? What limits do they have? And then the last term under contracts that's pretty simple, but a lot of people skip over, is just the plain notice provisions, that if you have a natural disaster, do you know who to contact on the other side in the contract? And do you know how to send them that notice? Can you do it by email? Do you have to send a letter? So just understand the notice provisions. And briefly, I'll hit on the last category. As I mentioned, the third category, that's a not so obvious disaster. It's when owners in a business, they want to split ways or part ways, or when I call it the 3Ds, the death, disability, or divorce of a partner or another owner in a business. And the one thing I want to mention, a lot of small businesses may not have a full set of corporate governance documents. What do I mean? Some people will go online, they form their entity, but do you have your, for an LLC, do you actually have your LLC agreement in place that has language in the agreement with the other owners of your business on how you're going to deal with a partnership split, or how you're going to deal with the death, disability, and divorce? If you have a corporation, do you have a shareholders agreement that does the same thing? So the question is, do you have your corporate governance agreements in place? Typically in those agreements, it deals with those issues. If partners want to split, or what happens in the event of a death, disability, and divorce. So just make sure your corporate governance documents are in place. Thank you all, and Portia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Greg, and for breaking down that so eloquently. So I'm going to invite all of our panelists, if you want to just come on camera so that everyone can see you all at one time. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Should anybody have a question in the audience? We did have a question earlier. I think it was touched on several times, but I just want to make sure that it was. And that was, so how do you determine what makes a good plan? Can anybody answer that and kind of sum that up for one of our participants?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick on that. And I think I don't want to say it depends, but I would say a good plan is one that you're going to use and review and look at. So we talked about all the different plans we can have, and there could be huge comprehensive plans, but finding or crafting plans that are specific to your business and that can be managed within your business. It has to be a lengthy document. It needs to be something that you can practice once in a while. And more importantly, have somebody to own the plan. Somebody you can assign to make sure that periodically the plan is being updated. More importantly, there are some practice runs of that plan. So those are games I would say to make sure you have a good plan. It's a draft it, practice it, but don't make it so elaborate that nobody looks at it again.
Great, great. And so, folks, this is your time to ask any questions. We have about a couple minutes left for questions. That was the only one that I saw in the chat besides, will there be a recording for this webinar? Yes, and we will post it on our YouTube page, and our YouTube handle is Opportunity-OBO. So are there any questions? One that folks may be wondering is, are there any offices that help provide funds to prepare for mitigations? If they want to be proactive, which was heard, are there any offices or resources that anybody knows of that will be able to help businesses to prepare for disasters?
I'll say for the SBA disaster loan program, it has to be added to a disaster loan that you're already receiving for a disaster. So it's not a separate loan that you can apply for ahead of time. There may be other SBA, traditional loan products where, that could be something that could be utilized. But under the disaster loan program, it's got to be in addition to a current loan that you're seeking.
Excellent. And in the lane of being proactive, how much should business owners budget for disasters that you all spoke of today?
This is Ken. I'll jump in on the cyber side. On average, most are doing about 12% of their total IT budget. Obviously, if you do more, the better. But the key is being using things efficiently, because some organizations get way too many. They believe all the hype of cybersecurity companies that are selling them different solutions. So you get 500 different tools they don't need or they don't use effectively. So be efficient with it, and you can do a lot with a little bit of money.
Great. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay. We do have a question in the chat, and it says, if you do come into contact with ransomware, do you follow through with the ransom, or do you immediately have to contact someone? Basically, is there any way around not paying?
Yeah, the thing about paying, and of course, law enforcement will say you don't pay. The reality is, even if you pay, very few times we actually get your stuff back. So the best thing to do is again, plan in advance, have that incident response plan, work with your attorneys like Greg, for example, and shamelessly plug you, Greg. But work with your legal team and determine. In most cases, you probably want to involve law enforcement, including the FBI, HDD, or Harris County if you're local here as well. But definitely FBI. They've got resources and they've got legal ability that you don't have. And there may be, they can also work with security organizations around the world that might be able to break the encryption, depending on the ransomware that it is. So there are decryptors out there. So long way of saying, plan ahead, incident response plan, know who to contact, and definitely reach out to the FBI. Worst case, they tell you no, reach out to this other place. But I think, in the vast majority of cases, the FBI is going to be the place you want to reach out to.
And the only thing I would add to what Ken's saying, it depends on the type of ransomware and what type of information they've gotten from the organization. If they've gotten personal information, they've gotten information that could be damaging or harmful or even illegal to someone, depending on what they have and what they're threatening, contact law enforcement immediately. So depending on the threat, it may be a threat where you don't have time to worry about paying. You may need to contact the authorities immediately because it may be a risk to someone and maybe putting someone at harm. So it depends on the type of ransomware.
Great. And so any more questions from our audience? As I give you a minute or two to put those questions in the chat, I just want to go to our experts and first say thank you so much for all the information you shared. This was amazing and valuable information, practical tips, and you incorporated real life scenarios so we could truly understand what these disasters are and how that affects our businesses. So with that, I'm going to go to each one of you, and if you have any last remarks to make those. And so I'm looking at Vlad first. So Vlad, go ahead, and if you have any closing remarks you want to make.
Overall, as I think all the panels have said, is all about preparedness. If you're making a plan, I would say definitely just focus on, again, the tangible things. So your people, your staff, your prized possessions. So make sure you have insurance, and then personal needs specific to your business. Again, I think those are the key items, and everyone talked about those. And then please visit our website for additional resources.
Stephanie?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I would just like to follow up, one of the things we're seeing on the residential side is a lot of individuals are underinsured. And I'm sure that the same thing is happening in our business community. So contact your insurance organization, make sure that you have the right type of coverage that meets your needs. And flooding can happen anywhere, anytime. It doesn't matter what your risk is on the FEMA thing or the Harris County thing. Anyone can flood in Harris County, as we've seen. So make sure you have flood insurance. You'll be better off because of it.
Valerie?
I will say, whether it's related to disaster or not, you don't have to go at it alone. SBA has a network of resource partners. These are mentors and advisors who are here to assist you with all your business needs. So, really take advantage of that. And I will drop that in the chat again. You can find your nearest resource partner by zip code. Again, help you with all your business needs. You don't have to do it alone. The help is out there for you. You just have to make that next step.
Ken?
Yeah, really just echoing what everyone else is saying, right? Be prepared, think about this stuff in advance and leverage resources. There's a ton of free resources out there. There's many cybersecurity professionals around the world that'll jump in and help you for most of them for free. Some of them will charge you a nominal amount as a small business owner, but don't try to do it alone. I mean, even myself as a cyber professional, I've got companies that I leverage. I reach out to these companies. I have people I reach out to say, hey, I don't know this area that well. You're the expert in that area because that's all you do. So I think you need to reach out to those resources that are out there. And, again, don't go it alone. There's a lot of help out there for you.
Greg?
And I can't remember who said it, that it's not that if a disaster will happen, it's when. And no matter what size your business is, everyone should have a plan and everyone should be prepared. So don't think that it won't happen. It will happen, and you just need to be prepared for it.
And Spurgeon?
Right, great. And once again, thank you as well for putting this together and all the panelists as well as colleagues. Like I said, I really appreciate you helping me and Portia out with putting this together. But I would ditto everything everyone said, and don't wait. Let's start now, get yourself prepared. And going back to the other question above about resources that you have, or how should you plan for? I look for a short term, at least a 30-day window. Be able to make sure you're able to cover your expenses for 30 days at least. That gives you a lot of time to recover, because a small business, that's critical. Be able to pay employees, make sure you have the right coverages, be able to reach customers and reconnect. So if you had to have a baseline, say 30 days of being able to cover all your expenses is a good benchmark to at least start with.
Excellent. Again, folks, thank you for attending, and definitely a special thanks to all of our panelists. And please make sure you've gotten all the information. A lot of their contact information and valuable resources were put into the chat. If I can find some way to save the chat and send it to y'all, I'll definitely will do that. But make sure you access that. And then these are the experts in the field. So make sure you connect with them for your businesses. You have it here. And that's one of the things we want to always make sure we do here at OBO is give you the resources and connect you to the people, to the experts that can definitely help you. And that we have done again today. So with that, be prepared for natural disasters. We're going to cross our fingers, pray, whatever you do to make sure we ward off any natural disasters that are coming up to our area. So hopefully it won't hit us. But if it does, then you all have the information to be prepared. So with that, thank you so much to everyone and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Portia.